Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of KerVAM, a Doctor Who podcast where we do actually talk about Doctor Who DVDs and Blu-rays, and that is certainly something we're going to be doing today because we're going to be discussing both the animated Underwater Menace release that was released a month or two ago. I think it was probably a little while ago now, but there's been a few other things going on in the Doctor Who world in the last month to talk about that wasn't maybe that was maybe a bit more exciting than the Underwater Menace. So we'll be covering that as well as the Daleks in colour, hence my sort of little image behind me, which is of course the first colorization there's ever been for a Doctor Who episode. So we'll discuss the questionable edit of that story, among other things. I think it's going to be quite a fun one, and we may well touch on the series 1 to 4 Blu-ray as well, which came out a couple of weeks ago as well. So I'm joined by Ryan and Bill today. I'm not sure if Charlie's going to join us. He might join a little bit later on, but we'll see how things go. So Ryan, we're sort of moving back into the classic series again. We spent a few weeks talking about obviously the 60th and all things new. Are you looking forward to going back to the classic days, or are these two releases a little bit less exciting to talk about?
It's been nice after being bombarded with so much modern stuff recently with the 60th anniversary trilogy. It was nice to go back and revisit some 60s Who. Some results better than others, but but although I don't know if that's really mainly to do with the story. I'm looking at you, Underwater Menace, but I think there's definitely plenty there to talk about. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think even if it's not necessarily all the greatest stories we're going to be talking about today, I think there's definitely stuff to talk about when it comes to it. So Bill, what would you say has excited you more in the last couple of months? Has it been the Underwater Menace animation, or has it been the Daleks in colour?
I would say about a sort of equal split between two of them, because I've been quite cautiously optimistic about both of them.
Okay.
The Underwater Menace I don't rate highly much as a story anyways, but I'm just glad that we don't have to put up with that horrible DVD release anymore. So
the worst reconstruction ever made, literally like one image per 5 minutes or something. It was so painful, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then the Daleks in color, I mean, colorization is a controversial kind of thing in some ways. It depends really on what we fans think of it. Some of us will be completely okay with it. Some people will see it as completely just not okay, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to go in with as much of an open mind about it as possible and just see, what they're going to do, and just see if it will. I mean, it won't replace the original black and white version for me, but just to see whether or not it can work, and what exactly they do with it.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll certainly discuss in a lot more depth the colorization, the possibility of the future ones, and all of that a little bit later on. But I wanted to start by talking about the Underwater Menace because, of course, a story that's probably relatively derided by fans. I would definitely not say you're putting it near the top of your popular Doctor Who episodes list. It's pretty damn low. I was lucky enough to go along to the BFI a couple of months ago to watch it in person in the cinema, which was pretty cool and exciting to see it on a big screen. I'm not sure I'd probably 5 years ago imagined myself watching the Underwater Menace on a cinema-sized screen, but it was an experience. And especially when some of the moments where the crowd joined in on the famous lines like "Nothing in the world can stop me now" and all of that. Everybody cheered that moment as it happened. As much as it's silly and stupid, it was still just a great atmosphere, really. So Ryan, the Underwater Menace is a story. Do you tend to agree that it's a pretty weak one in terms of just the actual story?
Yeah, it's looking at the 60s stories, especially the Troughton era. It's definitely not one of my favorites. I mean, it's not like absolute rock bottom. Like, it's not Dominators and it's not Space Pirates. Definitely not Space Pirates, but it is towards that very lower end of the spectrum. I mean, plot-wise, if you told me like the basic synopsis, it's not inherently bad, but I think it's just the problem. It's just so much padding in it. It feels like it takes a bit of a while to get going at times. Just kind of, it's kind of like with Galaxy 4 in a sense. It needs energy to it to kind of liven it up a bit, and that energy I just felt like was just lacking here. In a way, how I feel about Underwater Menace is kind of a little bit how I feel about Galaxy 4,
Okay.
somewhat to some extent. I mean, it's not great, it's not bad, it's just kind of average to me. But then again, Zaroff is a fun villain, so at least I think he was kind of the one constant. I was like, oh, I'm kind of amused by him.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like with this story, compared to some 60s stories that as you say, kind of Galaxy 4, for example, that are just kind of really average and kind of boring as a story. I feel like Underwater Menace is not a very good story, but at least it's kind of a bit more fun and a bit silly, and you can have a little bit of a laugh and a chuckle at it, which I feel like some of the other ones are lacking. Like, I have a good sort of comparison, I feel like, because I went to the previous animated release of Abominable Snowmen. They showed that at the BFI as well, and I was able to see that one as well. And comparing my experience of watching 6 episodes of Abominable Snowmen versus 4 episodes of Underwater Menace, I probably enjoyed Underwater Menace more, which is maybe controversial, but Abominable Snowmen is a good story, but it's felt really slow. I remember when I watched it, and watching it in a cinema and on the big screen over that really long extended period, I just found it less of a fun sort of time to watch it all compared to Underwater Menace, even if maybe Underwater Menace is a better story. I don't know, Bill, where do you sit with Underwater Menace? I know you mentioned it's not one of your favourites, but I don't know, how low would you put it?
It's my least favorite Patrick Troughton
Why?
story. So yeah,
Wow,
Worse than the Space Pirates.
Pirate.
Surely the
Yeah.
Space Pirates.
yeah.
What makes it worse than the Space Pirates?
Wow.
I mean, we've talked before about my kind of controversial thoughts on Space Pirates not being
Well, okay,
that
yes, very
bad.
true, very true. Yeah,
But yeah, I feel like it is just the Underwater Menace is utterly bizarre story. It is just I don't know what the writer was thinking with half the stuff that happens in it. It is utterly bizarre, and
yeah,
I think the thing is part of me feels like maybe if they had done it like nowadays, maybe it wouldn't be quite as bad in terms of like the
okay,
fish people and how they realize and everything,
yeah.
and that bit where they're just swimming and I, I
Yeah,
know
is there
they're
something
trying.
like 2 minutes on screen of them just swimming in that horrible music in the background?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
what is this? Like, why
it
did they think that
is.
was a good idea?
Yeah, it's a bonkers moment, and I can't get that out of my head. The music, especially, the minute
Yeah,
I think of the Underwater Menace, that is one of the first things I think of. And
yeah,
yeah, it's just bizarre because it is really it's a cartoony sort of story. It doesn't feel made for TV really. It feels
yeah.
like it's made as a very bad B movie from the 50s or something, like
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
a really
Yeah.
bad budget. And it is just unbelievable. Just I don't know. I just don't know what they were thinking with like deciding to pick that story to do. Like, oh yeah, we'll do that one with the fish people because yeah, that would be totally easy for us to realize on a very small budget. Like,
Yeah,
it
Yeah.
just doesn't work.
it's
Zaroff didn't make you laugh at all. He didn't entertain you.
yeah. Come
Oh
on,
no,
Sarah is a bit of fun,
Zaroff
isn't
is good. I mean, I think anyone will say that whether it's intentional or not, Zaroff is so I don't even know. It's
he?
just
Yeah,
Zaroff.
yeah,
That's the best way to
literally.
describe
Yeah,
him.
exactly.
Um,
Absolutely. Well, Bill, would you say that you hate the Underwater Menace? So
mm,
the best question to ask you is: has the animation saved it in any way as a story? Did you enjoy it any more because you could actually watch it visually? And
oh
did it
yeah,
change anything for you?
yeah, definitely. I mean, it helps. I can actually know what's going on now in like episode 4 when
Yeah,
Zaroff gets killed. I know how he dies now,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
like, oh, that makes much more sense than just
Yes.
watching a still image of his face just pressed up against that cage in
Oh, I
as I
know.
had
Yeah,
originally.
yeah, yeah.
It's just yeah, it was again. I think this is part of the issue. The Underwater Menace has not been very lucky in terms of home media up until
Mhm.
recently,
Yeah.
and I think that's not helped its reputation either. But
Mhm.
yeah, just the animation, just being able to know what's going on in each scene with the missing episodes, it just helps a lot because you can say even still wouldn't rank it that highly, but at least you can say, well, I know what's going on. I know
Yeah.
what's supposed to be happening, more or less.
Mm.
And I feel like the animation, for the most part, bear in mind, I only watched the black and white version of it.
Yeah.
I felt like it was mostly pretty faithful to the original version.
Hmm.
Um, compared to some of the more recent animations we've had anyway. It didn't seem to really drastically change up stuff too much. Like, I know they changed up the look of the fish people a bit,
Mm.
but that was still kind of paying homage to the originals while still doing their own thing, essentially, which
Yeah.
worked quite well.
Mm.
So yeah, it's helped me a lot to kind of, I still wouldn't rate it highly, but it's at least, I would actually stick this animation back on and rewatch it, whereas I
Okay.
would never, if I was given the option, throw that original DVD in the bin, really, because
Yeah.
yeah.
It's certainly never getting watched again by me, that original one. I've got it somewhere, but that's never come out again with that terrible reconstruction. Yeah, it's pretty bad. So, Ryan, do we think that the animation has improved it? What did you think of, like, I know Bill, you mentioned it's relatively faithful, but some of the things like I think the temple was quite different, quite sort of, some of the sets were just kind of larger, a bit more scale to them because they could do that because it's animation and because that's what they would have wanted to do if they had the money in the past. So I don't know, Ryan, do you think that those sorts of things kind of enhance the story for you?
It did a bit. It does help make Atlantis a little bit more
Mm.
creative and a bit
Yeah.
more like a city and like an underwater city. And yeah, I do think the animation has helped it a little bit. There were a few one or two little errors with the animation. I noticed that. I think this has been talked about online. When in part one, where the TARDIS doors open at
Oh yeah,
the
that's
inside
so
doors,
weird. Yeah, yeah.
the inside doors on the police post, was it just like
What?
why? It is like they're not supposed to look
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
literally.
And I know, again, maybe artistic decision, but it just looked really weird, especially when you watch it in color. When you
Mm.
watch it in color, it just looks so odd. But apart from that, I think they did a pretty good job with the animation. I think they definitely used the same animation from Evil of the Daleks. It has that same look and style
Mm.
to it, which I
Absolutely.
think it definitely helps. Because I mean, I've obviously said this before. Evil of the Daleks is still, for me, the best animation
Yeah.
Doctor Who animation to date, and I would say this is probably in the middle, or maybe just a near, just above in the top half of good
Okay.
animations. I think
Yeah, yeah.
it is fairly solid. I think they've done a
Mhm.
good job of capturing the feel and the vibe of the story,
Yeah.
even if it's not one I would pop on again like I would with Evil of the Daleks or Power of the Daleks or even the Abominable
Mm.
Snowmen. I would like if someone say, "Would you watch them again?" I would. Whereas I don't know if I. Well, this is definitely way infinitely better than the original DVD release.
That's it,
I
isn't it?
still
Yeah.
don't know if I would have the urgency to watch it again.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you did watch it again, would you take the approach of watching like the black and white animated episodes with the existing episodes, or would you watch the whole thing animated? How would you approach it if you're watching it again?
If I was to watch the whole thing animated from beginning to end, I would choose the color version.
Okay.
If I was watching the black and white, I would watch it with the existing
Yeah.
episodes,
Yeah.
which I think is how I approached it in the previous animations in the past. I would watch the black and white versions with the existing episodes, and then when it's the full thing from beginning to end, I would just go for the color version. That was a bit weird when doing the Web of Fear because I watched them all black and white and that episode 3 in black and white, which left just that watching just that one episode again in color, which definitely did not help. But then again, we've gone through our many issues and grievances with the Web of Fear animation.
Well, yes, and we may well be discussing those grievances again when it comes to the Celestial Toymaker animation, given the look of that one. So, I mean, we don't have a release date, so it could be way down the line. We have to worry about that. But at some point, there will be a podcast where I'm hoping we don't all come on and slate the Celestial Toymaker. But You just don't really know, do you? So I don't know. Bill, was there anything else to really take away from this animation? It kind of feels like, does it feel a little bit like we've just ticked the box of this one? Like, it was great, it's a cool animation, it brings it in line with others great stories like Eve of the Daleks or the Faceless Ones or the Macra Terror, but it's fundamentally ticked another 2 missing episodes off the list. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, I get what you mean about ticking the box. I think part of that is kind of, I think, valid because yeah, it's just another animation ultimately, and it's kind of just one where they just, it's, as you say, it's not a particularly well regarded story, so it's one where they just think, well, we just have to get this over and done with, really. Is and it's only 2 episodes as
Yeah.
well, so but I feel like it was a fine enough choice to go with. I mean, as I say, we've been waiting nearly 10 years for an animation of it. So
Yeah.
to finally get one is, it feels really, like it just feels great really to have it and to just be able to watch it and just understand what's going on. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just great. I think it wasn't necessarily on my list. It wasn't in my top like few of ones that I wanted them to do. But I think it's also maybe the fact that they did it during the year of the 60th. Maybe that will kind of annoy some fans a bit.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they have to go with what is actually viable for them to do economically,
Absolutely.
not just what us fans want. And we'd all love Marco Polo and the Daleks master plan and everything, but
Yeah.
there's no way they're doing them for the next 10 years at least. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, well, obviously, we know we've got the Celestial Toymaker to come next, which I'm not quite sure, given the animation style, whether that's maybe made by a separate company to the company that did this one, did Underwater Menace, and presumably he's going to do another one, because I'm pretty sure, from what I remember, when the executive producer of the range, Paul Hembry, was saying at the BFI, he said that there was going to be 2 concurrent teams. There certainly has been in the past, so I wonder whether, obviously, we've got a Celestial Toymaker coming next year, but whether we might get another one if we're really lucky, of this style of animation rather than the sort of Web of Fear style. So Ryan, if you could choose, I know we always say the next one, but let's go, rather than just saying obviously Dalek Master Plan, let's pick like a realistic one, like a more straightforward 4-part one that could be done in 12 months. Like, if you had to be narrowed it down a little bit, what would you choose? I
Does
know
it
it's a
have
tricky
to
question.
be 4 parts, or can it?
It could.
Because
No, we can push it to 6. We can push it to 6.
I think the one they could do is probably the Wheel in Space.
Yes,
Maybe
good
they
shout.
have a little bit of wiggle room with that one because 2 parts of it exist of that. So
Or is it 3?
that
Is it 2 or is it 3? And it's only 2,
I think
isn't it?
it's 2 parts. Two
Oh yeah,
parts.
episode 3
Part
and
three
6
and
or something.
six.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, parts 1 to 2 and 5, 4 and 5 are
that's
gone.
it.
So
Yeah,
I think that one seems like most viable because there are some episodes attached to that.
yeah.
I wonder what else. I it's. I mean, obviously they've done the Celestial Toymaker now. I mean, I would have liked them to have done the Crusade, but I don't think that's going to happen
Yeah,
now
at
at
least not at the
this
moment.
stage,
Yeah,
especially given the season 2 Blu-ray already happened. So,
indeed.
which is a shame
Yeah,
because I would have liked to see that happen. And this is going to be a totally random one. It's a pseudo-historic. It's a historical one. I know it probably never happened, but it was something I would like them to do, and that's the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve.
yeah. I think that'd be really
I
cool.
think that's a solid William Hartnell story. I would like to
Yeah,
see that get the animation treatment if they can do it one day. I know they said in the past like historical stories are the most difficult for them, but if
yeah,
they can do it, that is the one I would like to see tackle
yeah.
first.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like it's got quite a good reputation, but I also feel like I just don't know that much about it because I don't think really anything like moving visually exists of that story. There's like a few images from it, but it's one of those sort of mid-season 3 stories where there's so little content of it at all. So it's really hard to have a good impression of it. So I think that could be a real fascinating one. And is there any realistic picks for you, Bill, that you'd go for?
I was going to mention Wheel in Space, like Ryan, because again, it makes sense. It's the last Sideman story for them to do, and it just as far as I'm aware anyway, it's not a incredibly difficult one for them to do. So, and I think they're also, I mean, they might start focusing more on Hartnells, but they might try to finish off Troughton a little bit, because really it's just Will in Space and Space Pirates afterwards, isn't it?
I think
And
there's also
and the
Highlanders.
Highlanders,
Yeah, and the
sorry.
Highlanders. Yeah, I think that might be the one that sort of slows us down. I feel like the Highlanders is probably the most difficult one to do from the Troughton side of
Yeah.
things.
I think the Highlanders will be the last of the Troughtons. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think another one which I think is again a bit like the Underwater Menace, maybe not a pick that most of us would want, but I think is probably the one of the more doable ones is like the Savages,
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
because
Yeah.
that's one where again it's not that difficult for them to do, and it's 4 episodes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I don't believe anyway. I'd have to
Yeah.
double check, but I don't believe there's that many characters and sets for it, so it
Yeah,
should be a
exactly.
relatively
Yeah.
easy one.
I think if they've managed to pitch Galaxy 4 and sell that one, then they can sell the Savages. Because I feel like, the Savages doesn't really have any particularly visual monsters or anything that's easy to sell it off the back of. But they managed it with Galaxy 4 and the Chumberleys, so, they can make anything happen, I feel like. But we will certainly look forward to, the Celestial Toymaker. Even if we slate it in the end, I'm still excited for it. I still want to see it. So, that'll be fun next year. And then hopefully there'll be more to come as well. And obviously we'll be talking all about those. Now, the other exciting release that we wanted to talk about is the Daleks in Colour, which was released on BBC4 on Doctor Who Day, 23rd of November. So, it's nearly a month ago now. How's it nearly a month since Doctor Who Day? Time flies. And is coming out on Blu-ray in February, 12th of February, because I checked it, with some special features. I don't think it's got loads of stuff on there, but there's a few, extras and a little discussion of the colorization and that kind of thing, which will be interesting to get. So I feel like the topic of colorizations, as you kind of touched on at the start, Bill, is kind of a controversial one. So I'm intrigued before we get into this specifically the Daleks in Colour, where do we all sit on colorized Doctor Who? Ryan, do you think it's right that we colorize black and white Doctor Who? Do you think it's acceptable as a concept?
I'm not a big fan of colorization of the topic of colorizing black and white Doctor Who, because I feel like if something was made in black and white, then it should be in black and white, and that's kind of how I approached it with 60s Doctor Who. If this was the way it was supposed to be, then it shouldn't be changed. And that's how I've always approached it when it came to 60s Doctor Who. And there's prospect of them talking in the past about colorizing it. Always kind of got me a bit on edge, because I'm just like, oh, it's going to look a bit too artificial. It's not going to look it's going to take away some of that atmosphere of those 60s stories. Because one of the things with black and white is, part of the reason it was done that way is to cover up in case some of the faults, to help, because when it's in black and white, it's hard to make out at times. So it adds more to that atmosphere, and it's also, as I said, it helps hide some of the limitations and some of the faults. If you try and crank up like the brightness or the saturation and the break it in color, it can run the difficulty of exposing some of those faults and kind of makes it look not as good.
Yeah, no, I definitely know what you mean. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure we'll touch on that in a minute when it comes to the Daleks in Colour. But Bill, where do you sit on colorizations? Are you in a similar camp to Ryan, or are you more okay with them?
They're pretty similar. I mean, I'm kind of, for me, like the 60s is one of my favorite eras. So for me, you're never really going to be able to like, colorizations are fine, but I'm always going to prefer black and white because, as Ryan says, that's how they were made. That's how they were intended to be shown. Having said that, I understand the fact that black and white does not appeal to everyone, and that there are some people anyway who, I understand why they've done colorizations as a whole, because some fans will have looked at the 60s being in black and white and being 6 episodes long, some of them, and all this lot, and they'll be like, there's no way I'm doing that. Does not appeal to me at all. And it's like Russell T Davies said, there's some children out there as well who think very similarly about this as well.
Yeah.
So I get that. I get that it's not going to appeal to everyone, and I think it's important to like remember that and everything, because obviously we have all like grown up watching the 60s
Yeah.
as much as any other era of Doctor Who. So we're all used
Yeah.
to it being in black and white and being
Mm.
fine with it. And as Ryan says, if anything, we think it adds to the atmosphere and tension of each story a lot of
Mhm.
the time. But yeah, it's not going to be for everyone. So yeah, I think it's a nice experiment. It's a nice idea, but ultimately it is not intended. We're not the primary intended audience, as it were.
Mhm.
Like we're going to still seek out the black and white versions no matter what they do.
Yeah.
Even if they had not done what they did with the Daleks,
Mhm.
we would still pick the black and white version ultimately. Whereas for some new fans who maybe been put off from giving the 60s ago because it's been in black and white, the fact that they're now doing colorizations, they'll be like, oh, okay, I'll give this a go. And then they realize what they've been missing and they're like, oh, this is actually a really good cracking story. And I can't believe I missed this for so long because, just because of something seemingly trivial like it being in black and white. But yeah, it's something which I myself, I don't mind them experimenting with it, but I'm never going to. If you ask me which one are you going to pick, I'm always going to pick the black and white version because
Mm.
it's what I'm used to, and I just think it works better for most of the stories, really.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a really interesting discussion about that. As you say, I think probably, especially for the way they've done the Daleks in color, we're not the target audience for it. As much as we're all going to watch it, obviously, we're not necessarily the sort of creative decisions made in it. Maybe wouldn't appeal to us as hardcore fans, as opposed to the casual audience. And I think just in terms of colorizations, when I first heard about it, I was kind of like, "Do we really need that? What's the point? Is it just why?" But actually, watching the Daleks in color, like the color side of it, I did think looked really cool, and it was really cool to see those scenes and those moments in bright, vivid color, and seeing the Daleks and like that, all of it. I thought actually, as its kind of own separate thing, it's quite cool to see it in color. And I think there'll be some stories in the future that they do, as we know there's more of these coming, that will look really, really cool. And just seeing that sort of enhancement to it, I think can look really good. So Ryan, obviously this was done in color. What did you think of the actual colorization of the Daleks itself, of the story, of the different sets and things? How effective do you think that colorizing was?
Even though I said in the past that I wasn't a fan of colorizations, I did give this a go. And watching it, they they've done a pretty good job. I will give them that. They have, from what they were given, they done a pretty good job of colorizing it. I think some of the color choice I did think actually did kind of suit the story.
Yeah.
It didn't take away from it as I feared it would do, but
Mm.
and I think they've done a really good job of giving um, of how color is used and how it's appropriate for the scene and how the Daleks themselves look in color. I will admit, it did look pretty impressive. It did bring to mind Magician's Apprentice and The Witcher's Familiar a bit for me
Yeah.
when it
Yeah.
was on the classic Daleks in color. It did
Yeah.
remind me of that a little bit, and so I will give it props, even though I'm still always going to pick the black and white version, no matter what. Um, I will say, for a first attempt as an experiment, they did do a bad job. I feel like
Mhm.
they did exactly what they set out to do, and if if we are going to have more colorized stories in the future, and they approach it in the same vein as this in terms of colorizing it, then I don't think I'll be too opposed to it because I will, as I said, for a first attempt as an experiment, they didn't do a bad job.
Yeah, exactly. I think they definitely, it was a very vibrant, vivid, bright colours, very sort of striking to sort of, to the eye, and I know there was some slightly sort of, I guess, creative choices because obviously to kind of the audience this story is black and white, so the colors could be any colors. Like, yes, we maybe have seen set photos which tell us what color that top is or what color that floor is or whatever, but actually if you just watch the episodes you don't have a clue what color these things are. So I don't know, Bill, do you think it was right that they kind of took a bit of creative freedom to make all the floors absolutely bright blue and stuff like that? Like, do you think that they were the right creative decisions?
I think it was fair enough. It's kind of I suppose you could argue it kind of fits into how we regard the 1960s as a whole, really, in terms
Mm,
of it being quite swinging and psychedelic and stuff.
hmm.
So,
Yeah, true.
in terms of that, it certainly had that kind of effect on it. Um, I mean, I do have issues with other aspects of the colorization, but not the colorization itself, if that makes any sense,
Yes.
because I feel like that was probably the best part, was just seeing it in color was actually pretty good. I mean, yes, it wasn't intended to be like that, but the fact that it was like that, it just gives you a new way of just looking at the story more than anything, and it just
Yeah.
allows you to just just view it in a different light, and to just view it in a different light ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you say that almost the least controversial part of this was actually the colorization of it, ironically, given we thought that why are they doing this? This is so unnecessary. But actually I feel like everybody's more up in arms about the edit of this story and the score of this story than anything else. So Ryan, 70 turning 172 minutes into 75 minutes. Did it work?
Oh, yeah, this is my big criticism. I thought the editing. This is going to sound a bit harsh, but I did find some of the editing a bit atrocious, to be honest. But that's only just me. I just felt maybe it's because I'm just so used to the original
Mm,
story and the fact that it's my second favorite Hartnell story
yeah.
out of all of them.
Yeah.
And to see it edited like this kind of hurt my soul a little bit.
Mhm.
I know that
Yeah.
maybe a bit too extreme,
No, I know
but
what you mean.
it's it did feel like they were just doing it at a breakneck pace. It was just like next scene,
Yeah.
next scene, next
Yeah.
scene, and it was
Yeah.
just like give it some time to breathe.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it just feels so. It just feels so chopped down, and
Mm,
some of the transitions between scenes at times felt a bit choppy as well. And I know there were also some bit of criticism of the music, and while it is true it did drown out a bit of the atmosphere at points, I actually found that least problematic than the
yeah.
editing.
Yeah.
The editing just kind of annoyed me, and I can understand why, to some extent, why they wanted to make it an hour and 15 minutes. And in a sense, it almost matches the same time as the original Dalek movie,
Mm,
um, which itself was sort of like a condensed version of that original Dalek
yeah.
story.
Yeah.
But
True.
I'm going to say, I think that was a better paced version than this edited
Yeah.
version of the original story. Which I never, if I was given a choice between this or the Dalek movie, I never thought I said I think I'd rather watch the Dalek movie over this because it's. I feel like just some of the editing, it just kind of drove me up the wall a bit. It's
Yeah.
and again, I can understand it, but it felt like some of the context was missing. That
Mm,
they just kind of the fact that they were speed through it is just mind boggling, and I wish, I pray that if they are doing more of these colorizations in the future, if there are going to be some edits involved, do a better job with the editing. Just don't be scared of it being on a bit longer than it should do, because
yeah.
you sometimes need that slow pace, that context, and
Mm,
not just going through it at a breakneck speed that makes it look as if the whole thing's been put through a cheese grater. It's it's baffling.
yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, I've listened to some interviews with the guys behind it and tried to understand a bit more of why the editing was like it was. And obviously, sort of from the people who kind of directly working on its side, they're just told, you've got to make this 75 minutes. You have no option. Just make it happen. And that means that we kind of get quite a roughly cut story because, as you say, there are sections that are lopped out of it. Some bits that are quite rushed. So, I mean, I think we almost have to just treat this as not classic Doctor Who, almost. Like, I don't think that we can really have any comparison between what these are and normal classic Doctor Who, because it's completely different. It's completely differently edited. It's completely differently made with a different target audience and a different intention. It's almost meant to be the 2023 version of the Daleks rather than trying to just colorize the 1963 version. So I kind of have some sympathy for it in that sense, and there are some things where I kind of just choose to enter into the fun of it, like the silly sequence of Ian inside the Dalek and them trying to get escape and stuff that's just ridiculously fast-paced and crazy and bonkers. But I just kind of decided I'm just going to enter into the fun of this and just accept that it's nothing like the original. And the original is fine, and this is just kind of what it is. Because I think that's the only way you can kind of enjoy it, is just by not trying to think this should have been the original or anything like that. That was the way I justified it to me. And I know they also struggle with things like having really, really long static scenes with static cameras of two people talking for 3 minutes, and they want a bit of dialogue here and there from bits of it, but they don't want the whole thing. So it's how do you cut that so that it looks good? That's where we've got some of these weird flashbacks as well, is because they needed something to cover over the cracks of, I want a line at the start of this scene and a line at the end of this scene, but the shot doesn't change, so what else am I supposed to do? So I think it's not great in places, but I kind of understand why they had to do what they did.
Despite all this, I'm still gonna buy the Steelbook when that comes out.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're such suckers for this, aren't we? We're all going to buy the physical media release.
Yeah,
we like it.
I'm willing to go for it, and I'm excited to see what extra features on there. I wouldn't be actually surprised if they include, even though it's not part of it, they decide to include the Children in Need special Destination Skaro, considering, and it's unleashed behind the scenes documentary. Well, because it has Daleks in it. Well, sort of the beginning of the Daleks in there,
true.
kind of.
True.
And the fact that it's not included on the 60th anniversary specials Blu-ray set for some bizarre reason. I don't know why that happened.
I don't get it. Yeah.
It may be that they decide to lump it in with this one, which would be a baffling place to put it, but hey, at least it's somewhere.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible they'll put it on here. You never quite know. I know that with the release, they're putting the original Daleks 7-part Dalek story on this Blu-ray release, as well as apparently a 15-minute featurette about it, and the special features from the previous release. So it sounds more like it's just going to kind of be the original DVD release plus Daleks in color, but we'll find out in a few weeks' time when it's released. Bill, obviously we've talked quite a lot about the sort of edit of this story. I don't know, did you feel it was as egregious as Ryan has suggested in terms of just hacking it to bits?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it can be expected when they're trying to cut it down all the way to 75 minutes. I mean, that is quite difficult to do for a story that's nearly 3 hours long, I think. It's really difficult, and I think they've just done the best they can in terms of that, but I really do question some of the choices they made, such as that it is quite ridiculous actually that how loud that music was over that scene of Ian being in the Dalek, and then how they were cutting that down, which I don't think is that long in the original, but okay. But then they keep in the bit where they're climbing a mountain for half an episode, which is
I know.
interesting. I would say that that's not really a very important plot point, at least not that you could just like cover up with a bit of like new dialogue, like referencing that or something. But yeah, it's a very strange choice. I think it's ultimately I think I saw some people saying on Twitter or X I should say, how it feels like a massive trailer ultimately, and I think that's kind of it. It doesn't feel like it is a proper episode of Doctor Who. It just feels like just a sales like trailer, just to say this is what we could do with the colorizations, like, and I think that's it. It's just a prototype, and they're never going to get these things right with the first time, and we just have to hope and pray that some of the editing choices for some of the future ones will be a lot better. And yeah, I mean, I believe the next rumored one is the War Games, which I am very apprehensive about because I really don't know
Oh,
if they can make that
They
work.
they
If
can't they can't it can't be. It can't.
not in 75 minutes,
I'm
that
not
definitely
having
not.
4 hours cut down to 75 minutes. That's not happening. Like
Yeah,
maybe 2 hours.
no.
I know they
Yeah,
do
one
yeah,
quite
of
a
my
lot of
yeah.
like
favorite.
escape capture going around in circles, so they probably could hack quite a bit out of it, but not
Mm,
44 hours to 75 minutes. It's not happening.
yeah.
No,
It
it's my
just feels
favorite
like a
story
very
as
strange
well.
choice as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you'd think something more fitting would be like the Mind Robber, if anything, because
Mm,
that would work really well in terms
yeah.
of being colorized,
Yeah.
because we can see it in color. And I don't know, it's like if we had all the Celestial Toymaker, that would be good as well, because then we could,
Mm,
just see it all in color, and it just would lend itself to the story. But no, the war games, apparently, anyway. I mean, that could be wrong, but
yeah. Who
yeah.
knows? Yeah. I mean, I'm
Yeah, it's my
certainly
favorite
intrigued.
60s. Yeah, it's my favorite 60s stories as well.
Mm.
It's of all the classic Doctor Who's, it's probably my, I mentioned before, it's my second. I think I mentioned my second favorite, and just the thought process of seeing that actor Peter's being put through like a cheese grate and coming out so like a hatchet job.
Yeah.
Oh, it's making my heart sink, man. It's not filling me with hope.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
I think as a whole, I did quite enjoy this, accepting that it is nothing like the original and it's not meant to be like the original. I think that's, as I say, I think that's the only way to enjoy it. And I think that's why I, on the whole, enjoyed it. And I think it was just quite, in some ways, the kind of fast pace of it made it kind of exciting, even if it was a bit messy as well. So, and I feel like the score did enhance it as well. I know we briefly touched on that. I don't know, Bill, the new Marquez score to this story, do you think it spoils the atmosphere or does it enhance the atmosphere of the story?
I thought it was all right. I mean, apart from that bit with Ian in the Dalek, I thought it was mostly okay. I think it's because he took a lot of the original from Tristan
Yeah,
Carey, didn't he?
yeah,
He took a lot of
absolutely.
that, so he was just pretty faithful to that, and so I think that helped to kind of just blend the original version together, this new vision, as it were.
Yeah.
And I feel like the new kind of bits of dialogue that they added from Nick Briggs
Mm.
and David Graham, I think, as well. That kind of helped to just kind of, I think that was mostly just so they could kind of skip over important plot elements with, but still kind
Yes,
of
basically.
referencing them,
Yes, yes, yeah.
which is fine. And
Yeah, it's the way to do it. Mm.
we get to see more Daleks, if nothing else, so that's
Exactly.
all right.
That's
I
literally
think
what it's
the
called, yeah.
Yeah, I think the editing though is, I mean, I get that it's not intended for us, as I was saying earlier, it's not intended for already established fans. But I think even if you are going into this for first time seeing this story, it's still a bit, I wouldn't say condescending, but how they keep having recaps to what happened like a couple of minutes beforehand just feels a bit like, I there's that whole thing about attention spans these days and stuff. But
Yeah.
the fact is, I don't feel like they need to go that far with it, because I feel like people who were actually interested in watching this, would still be paying attention, even if it had been a couple of
Yeah.
minutes since
Yeah.
whatever had happened.
Yes.
So that felt a bit strange. But again, it's a prototype ultimately, so
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah,
see how they
exactly.
develop.
Exactly. And I think it's always it's a funny one because there's the whole thing about it kind of targeting a fresh new audience, but then they showed it on BBC Four on a Thursday night. When are we really going to have that many new fans tuning into Daleks in Color on BBC Four? I know it's on iPlayer now, but I don't know if you guys have found it. But it's not the easiest thing to find on iPlayer because you have to go into the season one section of the classic series and then it's there at the top, but you don't just sort of see it on the main Whoniverse page. So I feel like they could make it a bit easier to find as well if they want to try and make this accessible to a new audience. I don't feel like they're maxing that out. And then obviously physical media releases are definitely not going to be bought by new fans. Like it's only going to be with the steel. You're not going to get someone who's never watched Doctor Who buying the steel book of the Daleks in color because that could be interesting. It's not going to happen. So I don't know. I get the idea behind it, and I'm not unhappy that we're getting more, because it's confirmed that we are, and I'm looking forward to whatever comes next. I sort of feel like something like Tomb of the Cybermen could work quite well potentially, or at least focusing, if you're going to do 75-minute cut downs, then do 4-part stories that when you've only got to lop out 25 minutes rather than an hour and a half or something. Like, I sort of feel like the Daleks is one of the worst ones from that perspective because it's so long. Most of the other stories from that era are kind of 6 episodes at worst. There's quite a lot of 4-parters in there, so there's a lot more choices, I think, where you'll get much more of the story through the colorization. So I'm certainly intrigued. I mean, Ryan, what would be your sort of picks for ones in the future? If you have to pick 75-minute colorizations, what stories would you go for?
Two of the Cybermen is a very good choice. I think I can see that being sort of was a down just a tiny bit, but by not too much. Because of that, the editing wouldn't be too egregious. Oh, so many good choices. I know this may not be a popular choice, but maybe they could, if they wanted to do another Hartnell one that's maybe a 4-parter, maybe the War Machines.
Yeah, it's not a bad shout.
Maybe that they could possibly do that. I mean, I imagine if they had the full 10th planet with Part 4 existing, they would have definitely have done that. But yeah, I think, and also, I don't think there's any short Troughton ones, and pretty much the bulk of them is kind of 6-parters.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would probably be something like the War Machines or Two of the Cybermen, to be honest. But I mean, they could do the Ark or the Gunfighters, but are they really that popular, those two? I'm not.
Well, yeah. It's a struggle, isn't it? So I think maybe that's why we are just going to get cut down stories, because actually there's not that many 4-parters from that era. I mean, if they go to 6-parters, they could do the Web Planet or something like that. That would be a really exciting time to watch the Web Planet in color.
The Web Planet, they could, of all the ones that could be whittled down, that would probably the best one to do, because man, the Web Planet is so meandering at times. There's a lot of excessive padding in that one. That, honestly, I think I wouldn't mind them doing the Web Planet next. I think that could, some psychedelic colours to that one, and maybe some proper editing to whittle it down. Maybe that could work. I wouldn't be too opposed to that. I mean, even though it's not one of my favourite stories, I think I could perhaps see that working.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it at least opens a whole world of potential for new releases, new Doctor Who content. I think seeing these episodes in colour is going to be very, very cool, even if it's in quite a different format and a different way to what we're used to. And, it looks likely that for the next few years, at least, we're going to get one a year of these colorizations, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, I don't think they're going to, they're obviously not anytime soon going to get through the lot of them. Like, there's a lot of black and white stories, so I think, maybe it'll just be a sort of best of maybe 10 of them ultimately, I expect, rather than too many of them. But I do think it's a good project and something that we can look forward to more of in the future, even if we don't love them necessarily, and if our first choice is always going to be the original. I think that's the thing, isn't it? The first choice will be the original, but these are a fun addition as well. So one last thing we wanted to quickly talk about before we go was the recently released, yet another release of series 1 to 4 of Doctor Who, because we haven't had enough of original DVDs, re-released DVDs, original Blu-rays, Steelbook Blu-rays. We've now got another Blu-ray release of them. So Ryan, is there any point? Is it any different? Should the listener listening to this right now going, I've got the Steelbooks, should I buy series 1 to 4 again? What's your answer?
That's going to be really tough, because I know there was the whole issues with the speed. It wasn't, apparently they weren't done at the correct speed. I did watch the original 2013 Blu-rays, because when I heard about this first time, I just steered far away from them. When I heard about that. So if that's something that really annoyed you and you want to watch it at the correct speed, and you want to watch it on Blu-ray, this is probably the best you're going to get, because it is the correct speed. Although the picture quality, from what I've heard, is not that different from the 2013 Blu-ray. It's pretty much the same. It's just the correct speed, and And that's pretty much it. And also we have the 2005 Children Need special playing with the correct audio, which is
Very true. Yeah.
which is a bonus.
Yeah.
And there's also that new interview with Russell and David, which is definitely nice as well. Though it's not all perfect. I checked all of it,
Yeah.
and there are some problems.
Go on then. Hit us with the problems.
First off, the DVD artwork, the Blu-ray artwork, is atrocious. I know that's
it's
the least of all.
Yeah.
It just feels so copy and paste and slapdash. It doesn't feel like there was much care put into the Blu-ray covers.
Yeah.
And honestly, if they just used the artwork from the original standard Blu-ray releases, I don't think anyone would have complained too much. But
exactly,
the fact that they went with this, it feels like the worst way to go.
Yeah.
And there's also some things and some omissions and some changes that are a little bit strange.
Mm-hmm.
As if I can remember all of them. There is the audio commentary for Last of the Time Lord is not the one from the DVD release. It's the podcast audio commentary with Russell. The cast commentary has been omitted from this release.
Yes.
There's that. The Next Doctor and the 2008 Christmas special. There are some lines of dialogue that are missing, apparently. Oh. There's some lines of dialogue that are just not there. They're just gone.
Okay.
So, for some reason, that story, there's some problems in terms of voice dialogue coming out, which is really weird.
Yeah.
The series 4 David Tennant video diaries,
they
are there, but they're on the wrong discs. They swapped them round on the wrong disc. So the Journey to Blackpool one is on the Stolen Earth and Journey's End one, while the one for the proper Stolen Earth and Journey's End is on disc 1, where there's Voyage of the Damned. And so for some reason, they've done that, which is
okay.
And the Infinite Quest and Dreamland is not on there. They've got rid of them, as well as the Sarah Jane Adventures, Wedding of Sarah Jane, which was apparently part of the original Steelbook release.
Yeah, it was on the Steelbook.
On there. It's a bit, and also, and again, the leaflets inside the Blu-rays are very naff.
They're the same. They're just the same ones as the Steelbooks and the Blu-rays. They're just a bit of paper, aren't they?
Yeah, it's just hasn't been that much thought put into this release. It's nice. It's like they took 2 steps forward with the correct audio speed, as well as the correct 2005 Children's special. But it's like they also took some steps backwards as well, like and some things missing or not been corrected, and it's the same. Would I recommend this? I'm mixed, to be honest, because on the one hand, if you want to experience them on Blu-ray, this is probably the best way to go about it. It is in some ways an improvement on the 2013, but if you want something that feels like that has a lot of effort put into it, like that was really put together and well packaged, like this is the perfect ultimate collection of the Russell T Davies years, I'm not sure if this is the right one, to be honest, considering some of the errors, a lot of the errors that are in it. So in that sense, can't help but feel somewhat a little bit disappointed, even though it is nice to finally have them on Blu-ray, having not watched and having bought the original 2013 ones. But it is nice, but I still can't help but feel somewhat a little bit disappointed.
Yeah, no, I do know what you mean. I think I've been able to have the comparison because I'm a crazy person of of the Blu-ray Steelbook Blu-rays to these Blu-rays to be able to tell the difference. And I think, as you say, the key thing is the correct speed that they're playing at. They're playing at 25 FPS rather than 23.97, I think, or whatever, which meant that all the episodes used to run about 3 or 4 minutes longer than they should have done. And as much as your eyes would kind of adjust to it while you were watching it, you could still see that it was wrong when you watched it. You could see, like, on panning shots how like juddery the movement of it was, because it's fundamentally playing at a different frame rate to what it was originally filmed at, which just that conversion just screws it up. So it's certainly nice and noticeable, and I appreciate that it's fixed now. Obviously it's a pretty basic thing that should have been done on the original, and it's like, just why do they not? So I think that's a really good thing that that's there, and it does make it like, this is definitely the best release we ever had of the Blu-ray of Series 1. It's the best quality, it is the best, but whether it's worth it over what we've previously had is probably debatable. I think the picture quality of this year's Blu-ray release is basically the same as the previous Blu-ray release. It's like, obviously it's a big step up on the DVDs, but if you put the two Blu-ray releases side to side, apart from that frame rate being fixed, they're kind of pretty much the same. So I don't really believe them necessarily when they said on, when they promoted it saying there's a whole new restoration and stuff. I'm like, it's definitely not. And the audio is the same as well. The audio sounds as all over the place as it did before, where you watch Rose and you get to that scene where Henrik explodes, and it's the loudest explosion you've ever heard in your life coming out of the speakers, when you can't hear the dialogue, and then the explosion is just like blowing your eardrums up. And I'm like, come on guys, surely you should have you remixed the audio tracks on this, because it's appalling. It's terrible. I'm literally spend the whole episode like turning the volume up and down as I'm watching it, because it's just sometimes so loud and other times so quiet. So there's been no audio restoration done on it. So I think that was a real shame, because that's something I was really hoping for. And I'm sure that if and when in the future the collection range does finally reach New Who, that things like this will be fixed. And part of me would say, if you already have a release of Series 1 to 4, you might be better off just waiting until they hopefully release it with the collection in the future, because I think that will be a much better release than this. It's what I'm so desperately hoping for, because as you say, Ryan, as well, there isn't anything new really in terms of special features. There's just that one 17-minute video with David Tennant and Russell T Davies just basically just remembering their favourite memories of Doctor Who for 15 minutes, which is cool, but like, it's no new insights. There's nothing, new behind the scenes or anything like that. It's just them going, Doctor Who's a great show, here's all those episodes I used to love watching and stuff, which is cool, but is nothing new. So yeah, as you say, there are little niggling problems with it as well, in terms of, audio missing and commentaries taken off and stuff like that. So I think it's probably... Oh, sorry, go for it.
I've just remembered there was another little problem. I know this is a very minor thing.
Yeah.
When you on the Blu-ray for End of Time,
yes,
when you're doing the chapter selections, they use the same ones from the Stolen Earth and Journey's End.
Yeah,
they haven't done anything, and
very even basic.
The menus are so basic, and they just feel so slapdash. So it's not very good.
It feels like it's the most definitive release we're gonna get for a long time. So if you don't already have it or don't have a Blu-ray, it's probably worth the upgrade, but it's still not perfect. And there, as you say, the packaging is pretty naff. So I've already transported all the discs from that box into all of my Steelbook boxes now, so that I can have the discs in my nice Steelbooks, and then the old discs are just stuck away with that naff looking box in a cupboard somewhere, never to be seen again. So I sort of thought that was the best way to approach it. And yeah, it's worth it if you don't have it, but otherwise I'm not so sure. Bill, did you manage to pick up the release? And if not, have either of us sold it to you?
No, to be honest, I've kind of put off even more by it now. Yeah, I was very unsure about it anyway, because when it was first announced, because I was kind of just thinking, well, do we really need this? I mean, as you say, hopefully one day it will just get released on the collection anyway. So so from my perspective, what is the point in kind of getting this, especially when it's like 50 odd pounds, I think, at minute,
and 55 quid. It's not cheap.
Yeah, and you just kind of think, well, maybe if that's reduced at some point, then I might consider it. But again, just hearing the horror stories just now, I'm just a bit like, well, maybe not then. Maybe I'm just fine with the DVDs. That's all I've got, the DVDs really. So yeah, I think I might just wait until maybe one day they do the collection box sets instead, because that I know they will hopefully anyway be able to do the correct amount of restoration, both video and audio, and just give it the love and care that they need. And to be honest, I think maybe it's just the fact that there isn't much else you can do with them episodes, because whilst like most of them were not filmed in HD, beyond kind of making them look as HD as possible, there's not really much else you can do, because they're not too long ago. Like 20 years is not too long in the grand scheme of things. So I think maybe it just needs to, in terms of technology, maybe we just need to wait another 10, 20 years or whatever for the collection box sets to come out, and then they'll be able to do a proper restoration of them and remastering, and that will be much more worth the book, really.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're absolutely right. As you say, these episodes were recorded in standard definition with standard definition cameras in 2005 onwards. So we can always try and make it look better, but much like most of the classic series, it's never going to look properly HD because it just wasn't filmed that way. So I think we've kind of reached pretty much the pinnacle of the visual restoration of it that we're going to get. Maybe the collection guys can do a bit more work on it in the future, but I think the audio is the biggest thing that's kind of lacking on it. But we're going to have to wait now for a while to be able to see any improvements on that side. But that's our fairly negative review of the Series 1 to 4 Blu-ray. So do go pick it up now if you haven't been put off by what we've said. But no, if you haven't got any release of it, then get this one. But otherwise, maybe think twice about it. It's probably we've taken the financial hit so that you don't have to, is probably what we can say here. But that is pretty much all we've got time for on this edition of KerVAM. It's been great fun to talk about some classic Who releases and things going on there, because it feels like it's been a little while since we've done that. So, and I'm sure as we've got the Celestial Toymaker to come next year, and I'm sure we'll have some Blu-ray collection box sets to discuss next year as well, and we'll be discussing lots more of that. But of course, our next podcast will be discussing the Church on Ruby Road, the Christmas special that's coming out next week. I'm not sure exactly when, but somewhere between Christmas and New Year, we'll be bringing you a new episode discussing all of the exciting stuff to come out after Ncuti Gatwa's first proper episode as the new Doctor. So please do join us then for that. But for now, that's just about it from this podcast. Remember to check us out on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on my YouTube channel, EMS Productions, and also on Twitter /X at KerVAM Pod. But for now, from me, from Bill, and from Ryan, it is goodbye for now.